we're going to listen to our first myth, and it's going to be on a read aloud. And this myth is called the Blue Bell. So, have you heard a strange story or myth about a flower? Did you wonder if the story were true? So let's listen to this myth.
The Blue Bell. Have you ever heard a strange story or myth about a flower? Did you wonder if the story were true? Emma took Jessie's hand and led her to the edge of the woods. Shall we take the shortcut? Emma asked her little sister. Shall we walk through the bluebells? Jessie was surprised. Emma never wanted to take the shortcut at this time of year. The shortcut that wound through purple spring flowers was scary. But what about the invisible fairies that hide in the bluebells? Jessie asked. Please, Jessie, Emma pleaded. I'm cold, and the shortcut is so much quicker. Jessie remembered the story she had heard about the bluebells. No flower is as magnificent as the bluebell. But beware, if you disturb these purple flowers, they will ring like bells to summon the fairies. The fairies will gather and cast their spells upon you. Jessie wasn't sure if the story was true, but what if it was?
All right. So looking here at this card, let's read aloud. Who do you think this tall girl is? Do you remember her name? Kaden?
Emma.
Emma. Yep, you're right. This is Emma. And then her little sister, what is her name? Ellie? Jessie. So we have Emma and Jessie. And they're walking through the woods, or they're at the edge of the woods, and they want to take a shortcut.
At least Emma does.
But Emma does. How come Jessie does not want to take a shortcut? Mason?
Look at the footsteps might disturb the flowers, and the flowers might suck them
The fairies. So their footsteps might, what did they say, make a noise or a sound? And it might disturb the flowers. And what are these flowers called?
Bluebells.
Bluebells. And they're kind of, did they say purple color? But they're kind of like a bluish purple color. And I think in here they said
Purple.
They said purple. Yeah, they said purple flowers, but looking at the card and the picture, they are kind of a little bluish tint to them too. And so if you disturb these, they will ring like bells, because they're called bluebells, and they will summon. What does summon mean? That is one of our vocabulary words on our card. Summon. That's a big word. What do you think, Mason?
It means like call them.
Call them. Yes, summon means to call. So,
but since the bluebells don't have hands, and they just ring.
they would just ring, exactly.
They just use their whole entire body.
Right, exactly. So, just like when the bell rings outside,
Is that what it's?
the bell is summoning you, will summon you to go line up outside. Or when Mrs. Murphy blows her whistle, I'm summoning you to come line up. Or if your mom and dad yell outside, time for supper, they will summon you, but they're doing it with their voice.
Or they're telling you. My mom tells me
So-
about come here.
So, what happens, they said, if the bluebells ring and the fairies come, what will happen? Or what could happen? What could happen if those fairies come? Mason, I'm glad you know. I'm see if anyone else does. What will happen, Ellie? Yeah, they'll do a spell. They said cast a spell. So they'll cast a spell on you. Now, do you guys think this story is true?
No.
What is it?
A
myth. This is a myth. So this is a myth, okay? Let's go to the next card. See what happens.
We won't disturb the bluebells if we stay on the path, Emma called as she hurried ahead. Just be careful. Be very careful. Jessie followed, moving slowly and gently along the path so as not to disturb the lovely lavender flowers. Emma was far ahead now, and Jessie was alone. She paused and listened. The woods were silent. There was no sound at all. No footsteps, no wind, no bluebells ringing. The flowers spread out around her, surrounding the bushes and trees. Yes, Jessie whispered to herself, no flower is as magnificent as the bluebell. Suddenly, she stumbled and stepped backward. She almost fell, but she caught herself and spun around, frightened. Beside the path, a tiny flower, the most magnificent bluebell of all, was shaking. Jessie leaned down. "Oh dear," she said nervously. "I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you. I was just tiptoeing home and I must have bumped you. Please stop shaking. Oh, look at the way your lovely petals hang down like bells. See how they curve up at the ends? I will name you Magnificent Flower. Oh, Magnificent Flower, you are too pretty to be evil. Please don't summon the others. Please don't cast a spell on me. I really am sorry. Oh, please."
So on this card, they're walking down the path, and Jessie suddenly stumbles. What does stumbles mean? What does stumbles mean? If you stumble. John, what does stumble mean?
Kind of like you kind of fall backwards, but you catch yourself.
Yeah, you kind of pull backwards, but you catch yourself. So you don't really fall. You're just kind of tripping, almost tripping. You have another, like, a synonym for it would be to kind of trip. But she catches herself, and then she kind of comes beside this tiny flower, the bluebell, and what does she call it? What name does she give it? It's a really big name. Charlotte, do you remember? What's the name that she gives it? It's a really big name.
So really,
Do you remember,
I
Charlotte?
know it starts with an M.
It does start with an M. Do you remember? Lily, do you remember the name of it? You don't remember the name? Libby. You're so close. Magnificent. Magnificent flower. Yes. And what does magnificent mean? Kaden, what does magnificent mean?
Really, like really cool.
Really cool, awesome, amazing. I would think amazing would be another really good word for it. So she comes and she's kind of talking to the flower, and she says, "You're too pretty to be evil. Please don't summon the others, and don't cast a spell on me." She goes, "I'm really sorry. Oh, please." Do you think she's gonna get a spell casted on her?
No.
Yes.
No, because she's being so nice. She's like, please,
Okay.
please don't.
Alright.
If I was the flower, I won't do it. And
Alright, let's go.
And now,
Jessie leaned closer and listened. The tiny bluebell trembled, but it made no sound. No crying or sighing, no moaning or groaning. Jessie was about to turn back when the strangest thing happened. A gust of wind, small at first, shook the flower, then blew harder and harder still until all the bluebells in the woods were shivering and trembling and shaking and blowing. Jessie listened. "I'm being silly," she thought. "It's just a story. It's a pretend myth like all those other myths about plants and the stars and animals. There's no such thing as invisible fairies casting spells." The woods were dark now. Quivering shadows came together and moved apart as branches creaked above. Lightning, followed by claps of thunder, lit up the carpet of bluebells, then zipped away as darkness returned. Jessie waited and wondered. Were the fairies hurrying to come and think of a spell to cast upon her? What would the spell be? "Please, magnificent flower," Jessie whispered, "please help me."
Okay, So at the beginning of this card, what starts to happen? John, what starts to happen?
It's starting to get dark and the bluebells go.
They're kind of,
flying and
yeah, they're
fade.
moving, aren't they? Yep, because there's a gust of wind that comes. It's dark. So what's kind of maybe coming, Raylan?
Like a storm.
Like a storm is coming. And she starts to quiver. That's another vocabulary word. What does quiver mean? If she's quivering, what does that mean? Lila, what does it mean to quiver?
Like shaking.
Like shake, yeah. You're kind of shaking, you're scared. So she's quivering. Why do you think she's quivering? What is she scared about, Addie?
The fairies casting a spell?
Yeah, she's afraid that these fairies are casting their spell on her. So she's talking to the magnificent flower. And what does she say to the magnificent flower?
Help me.
Brooklyn, what does she say?
She's saying, please don't take a spell on me.
No.
Please don't put a spell on me because
What did she? I mean, you're close, but Addie, what did she say?
help me.
Please help me. Please help me is what she says. She's kind of whispering to the flower. Okay, let's see what happens on the last card.
Jessie looked up at the dark sky. A clap of thunder surprised her, and she jumped. When she landed, she bumped into another bluebell, which was shaking. She couldn't believe her bad luck. As she was apologizing to the bluebell, she noticed that the storm was fading. The sky was getting lighter. The lightning and thunder had stopped almost as quickly as it had started. She could even see the sun peeking out from behind the clouds. Jessie looked around her. There were no fairies anywhere. She looked at the bluebells, which still looked as magnificent as ever. Just then, she heard Emma calling her. As she started walking on the path, she began to wonder, why didn't the fairies come? Are fairies real? Was that thunderstorm just a coincidence? Jessie decided it was all just a myth. She told Emma the entire story, and they agreed that they didn't believe in fairies or the myth about bluebells. Even though there's no such thing as fairies, let's stay on the path, said Jessie. We don't want to step on the bluebells. Bluebells really are the most magnificent flowers.
All right.
They actually are.
So, looking at this last card, the last part of the story, what happens here, Addie?
Like the storm starts to fade away and she saw the sun peeking and there was no fairy. But why is there a fairy?
I know. What do you guys think about this fairy here?
It just looks like a
Yeah. Because did any fairies come?
no.
No fairies came. So do you think this card is kind of like using your imagination? Like this is what would happen
I
if
think
the
they're
fairies
trying to
came?
trick us.
Kind of, maybe.
But they never put the fairy into it.
Right, because the fairies never came in the story, did they? But I think they're trying to have you use your imagination. This is what she was kind of thinking about in her head, is if the fairies would come, that is what she would kind of see. And then at the end of the story, or the myth, I should say, the myth, what was kind of like the message that we learned through here about these plants or these flowers? What was the message we learned? What do you think, Mason?
That the only thing that the flowers would do is just cause like a tiny thunderstorm.
They could. Yeah, they could. I would say I would agree with you on that. What was the message that was learned? At the very, very end, the very last sentence they said, that's usually the message or the lesson learned. Raylan, do you remember?
That they don't believe in fairies
Okay.
or that it's a myth.
Yeah, she says, even though there's no such thing as fairies, let's stay on the path. But she says one more thing. Do you remember, Ellie? Yeah, the bluebells are the most magnificent flowers.
No, that's not the last thing she said. The last thing she said was not step on the flowers.
Oh, that's the second to last thing. So good memory. She said, we don't want to step on the bluebells. bluebells really are the most magnificent flowers. So good job. That was the second to last thing, and then the last thing was that they're the most magnificent flowers. Okay. All right. Did you guys like this myth?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you guys?
Mrs. Murphy,
Do-
can I show you something?
Just a second. Do you believe that this is true?
No.
It's just a myth. It's just a made-up story, usually with a lesson or a message to be learned. Okay, Brooklyn.
So that fairy